Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 32nd year, I talk to writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished, what they're planning for the future. It's a wider net than writers, though. We have had on over the years one or two sculptors, a couple of painters, a couple of musicians. So if you have an idea for a guest who might be a good fit at the Writer's Block, a writer or other brand of artist, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programs produced by 1623 Studios are a result of cable access television. So you stick with cable. It's a valuable community asset. You avoid all those other means, those dish kind of ways to access the internet. You stick with the Writer's Block. Thank you. I want to say tonight that I'm very happy we do have a writer, a distinguished writer who is a former colleague of mine, a professor at North Shore Community College, Carl Carlsen. He was also a guest on the Writer's Block in the very first year of our progress back in the early 90s. So it's wonderful to welcome him back again for his new product, Brickyard Stories 2.0. Carlson,
John,
welcome to the Writer's Block.
thank you. Great to be here.
I meant to read a part of the introduction to your book, which reads, in 1985, to accompany the opening of North Shore Community College's permanent campus in Lynn, the college published Brickyard Stories, a neighborhood and its traditions. My collection of poetry and prose drawn from interviews with former residents of the Brickyard. That was the original.
Yes.
And this, Brickyard Stories 2.0, is the follow-up.
Correct.
Now, our wonderful director, Becky Coyle, is now going to show the cover, so I don't have to hold it up. We can have a nice shot of the cover electronically tuned. Yeah. And urge all our viewers to get the book.
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, and where else can they access it?
At the Lynn Museum. It's really not available. You can get it from the Lynn Public Library. You can get it from the North Shore Community College Library, the Salem State Library, and you can borrow the book from those libraries. But Amazon.
So Amazon's the big source.
Is that the only the real outlet?
I want to ask how the idea for Brickyard Stories came about, and what sort of book is it?
Well,
I should say you're the editor.
I'm the editor.
This is not all your words.
These are stories drawn from interviews that I did with people who most often I either sought out or ran into. These are interviews from tape recordings done between 1982, believe it or not, and 2019. Some of the early ones were done for the first book, and I revisited those early interviews in 2018 after my father passed away, just thinking, that I had unfinished business. I collected interviews for years, always thinking in the back of my mind, well, I'm going to have a follow-up to the first book. And this is that. When I found some great stories, I continued working, continued gathering stories. So I do the interviews, I tape record them, I transcribe them, and then I find the nuggets, the vignettes that I like the best, and then I kind of edit them to make them as good a story as they can be. Some people would say it is too much of an intrusion, that I should just show you verbatim what a person said. But I'm more concerned with crafting a well written story, or a story that has its own momentum and arc, etc.
So you create out of history and historical documents, this is good history, you create the drama or the arc or the flow
Right.
that's contained in there. You reveal it.
A document in the sense that a tape recording documents what a person said to me, the stories that they told me of things that are, I think, of historic interest because they all took place in this neighborhood. The neighborhood was kind of multi-ethnic, multiracial, working class, diverse, and the mythology says that everybody got along. It was a great place to live. And,
we all know better than that.
Yeah, right. But the book has conflicts. The book shows friction between groups, so it's honest in that sense that it's not a kind of a rosy picture of life,
I want to mention before we go any further that Vincent Farini, who later adopted Gloucester,
Right.
and was the poet laureate here for many years, grew up in the Brickyard.
Yeah, and a couple of his stories about being a writer in the hurricane of 1938 are in the first book. And in the second book, he's he's represented there as well with some updates by other tellers of stories that he included in his landmark book, No Smoke, which was about Lynn and included elements of the Brickyard. So he's really an important godfatherly figure who's present in his own way in the new book.
Now, some of our viewers are perhaps not familiar with the term brickyard. This was a very carefully defined area, well, not legally defined, but a carefully identified area in Lynn way back in the 1800s.
There's a lot of argument, speculation about what constitute the boundaries of the Brickyard, believe it or not. And some people would argue this street, but not this street. And essentially, I would say, going from today, if you go down from the Lynn Common, down Commercial Street and Pleasant Street, down to the Linway, that what I call the Brickyard Corridor is an expanded, inclusive view of the Brickyard.
Maybe we have, courtesy of you, we have a couple of maps to show. And the first one that we're going to show is the 1877 map. And that's going to go up momentarily. And I wonder, while that's showing, you can describe what the viewers are seeing on that map.
Well, first of all, why I love this map and what makes it so remarkable is the presence of all the individual houses that are in there. You're having a bird's eye view when at the time I'm not so sure how anybody could get a bird's eye view. But you'll notice the railroad bisecting the Brickyard roughly a quarter of the way up from the harbor. It's just a marvelous map.
Where is the source of that map?
I don't know, John. Maybe I found it at the Lynn Museum or the Lynn Public Library, and then I took a photocopy. So
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. They can write me. My viewers can write me, and I'll find out from you where the source is.
Yeah, right. And I think 18 is far enough away that no copyright laws will apply.
No, I don't think that's a concern.
Yeah.
We have, courtesy of you again, a much newer map, 1957.
Yeah.
Would you talk about the changes there and what we're looking at in 1957?
Well, one thing that you might be able to notice is the Linway, which now replaces more or less the narrow gauge railroad. So I like to say that the narrow gauge went out of business in 1940. The Linway started in 1955, and I like to say that this kind of represents the change from railroad to automobile transportation. You'll notice that the streets between the two maps are more or less the same, but I've outlined in yellow the area that was certified for urban renewal by the Linway Summer Urban Renewal Project in the late 60s and early 70s. So the first book was really primarily from interviews from residents who'd been displaced by urban renewal. And some people think that that was the death knell of the neighborhood. But I like to think that the neighborhood, the Brickyard, is still alive, but transformed. It's a different kind of place. It no longer has, you know, the charm of this legendary place kept alive by memories of the pre-urban renewal Brickyard.
Yeah.
And now it's a different place. Other people have moved in. The tenements have been replaced, in many cases, certainly within the area of urban renewal, replaced by public housing towers and also garden apartments. There are some great schools there. There's a charter school there. There's the Lynn Y. There's a great basketball tournament
I know
held every
many
autumn.
of those similar changes happened in Gloucester.
Yeah.
And they were going on when I moved here almost 50 years ago.
Yeah, right.
They were still going on.
Yeah.
And it was much a part of the conversation about the city's changed.
Yeah.
Now not so much because it's deeper in the past.
Yeah, and also I think once the grievances have simmered down, then you get to kind of appreciate, as I would call them, the fruits of renewal.
Yeah.
So in place of rundown tenements, yeah, maybe it's not so great from the standpoint of community to live in a 12-story housing tower, but on the other hand, that's affordable housing, that's well maintained, and you know, you have I'll call them modern conveniences. So there's the yin and the yang, the loss and the gain.
Yeah, of course, with that first map that you showed us was all horse and buggy age, a completely different world than we're in. Now, I want to make sure you can read a couple of the brief memoirs, the interviews that you did. And I don't remember, I've read the book, but I don't remember how many interviews you did.
40.
And I counted them, 40.
Yeah,
40.
I counted them over and over. Sometimes I got like 39 and 38. And I freak out.
Depending how tired you were at the end of the day.
I can't believe it, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Today I want to read a story told to me by Marguerite Palaio. She told me, and maybe I can read two stories from you.
Of course. Now, who is this again now?
Marguerite Palaio was a woman, that I got to know through the Lynn Museum after the first book came out, and she was wonderfully supportive and always around and kind of encouraged me to do things. And finally I interviewed she and her husband a year after the first book came out. And her husband's father had built a house that had been demolished, and in the first book there was another speaker, different speaker, a guy named Austin Prendergast, who told about this particular house, Marguerite Palaio's father-in-law's house. And the speaker, Austin Prendergast, says, you know, this guy had more sense than any of us, referring to the urban renewal, because, you know, he built it to be his house. He didn't build it for an investment. And it was a great house, well constructed, and you know, a loss certainly for the Palaio family. But Marguerite, from my interview with her and her husband, I created two trios of stories from Marguerite Palaio. One trio about her mother-in-law and one trio about neighborhood characters. maybe I could read
So,
one each from those two trios.
yes, please,
Okay.
go ahead. And repeat her name loudly again.
Marguerite Puleo, P-U-L-E-E-O.
Yeah, okay.
You know, and I've
Please.
been trying to get in touch with her to send her a book. So if there's anybody listening who knows Marguerite, and you know,
So they're not in Lynn.
they're in Lynn,
Anyway.
but hard for me to contact her.
Okay.
You know. Anyway,
All right.
so this is the third about the mothers-in-law. When Tony and I were starting going steady, my mother wasn't too pleased I was going to marry an Italian fella. I said, Mama, give me a chance. Just meet him. See if you like him. So finally she did give in. She invited him this Sunday to have him for dinner. So I told Tony, I says, look, be quiet. I says, be nice. I want to marry you. But if my mother really says no, I'm not going to fight her for the rest of my life. Because my mother's a spitfire. If she doesn't like you, that's it. You know it. I say, just be quiet. You know, she's got a very funny sense of humor. If she's laughing, enjoying you, you're in. So the only thing that stuck in his mind was that my mother had a sense of humor. So the house is all clean, the food's on the table, nice tablecloth, and my mother's waiting there, and I says, Mama, you're going to like him. He's so nice. Art school, college, his mother and father own 2 houses. Okay. A knock comes at the door. My mother opens, and there he is. He had a hat on, which he'd never worn one before, a black hat. He had a long coat with a collar turned up, a cigarette drooling from his lips, and he really didn't smoke, and he says, hey, lady, Margie here? My mother's, oh my God, it's a mafia. You're marrying a gangster. She took up a broom and all the way down Neptune Street. Every mother is looking out the door. She hit him a couple of times, and he says, I thought it was funny. My mother says, it's not. You ever come near this house again, I'll call the police. It took the longest time for my mother to accept him, but that was funny, you know.
It's a good story. I remember that mafia line. So they married, and they've been married for many decades, so it worked out.
Yeah. I mean, Marguerite is elderly, and her husband, Tony, passed away.
And many of the people you've talked to, especially the earliest groups, must have passed away.
And not only that, but quite a number of them passed away just quite recently, in the past several years. So, you know, that makes their interviews, you know, maybe more important and more valuable. So Marguerite also tells me about 3 neighborhood characters, and I'll read, I like this one, Old Man Mohawk. The janitor from a court near 18 Neptune, we called him Old Man Mohawk. I don't know if he was Indian or not, but that was the name he had. He lived on the 1st floor, and he was always chasing kids out of the yard, but this was a court. Old Man Mohawk, his job really wasn't taking care of the place, it was just keeping the kids quiet. I remember we had this huge tree that grew out over the garage that was there, and we climbed the tree, get the branch that hung over the garage, and we'd swing out about 50 feet. Thanks God we weren't killed. The girls would do it. We'd climb the fence, jump on the tree, grab the branch, swing out about 50 feet back and forth. Mr. Conway owned a very respectable court next door, and his tenants were very well-to-do people, and here we were, troublemakers, nothing but kids, but it was his tree we were swinging on, so he'd complain to Old Man Mohawk, and Old Man Mohawk would come out with a broom, and he tried to hit us as we swung by in the tree branch. Well, one day my mother was looking out from our apartment, and she saw Old Man Mohawk, and he had my little sister Marilyn, and Marilyn was about 10 or 12, and he was hitting her leg as she swung by on the tree branch about 50 feet in the air. He'd jump up and try to swing the broom at her. Now Marilyn was scared to let go. She couldn't get back to the barn, and she was screaming, Mama, Mama! And my mother just looked up out the window. She was ironing, which was unfortunate, because she just pulled the iron out of the wall and, look out now! She threw it and got Mohawk right at the head, knocked him cold. He recovered, but he never hit Marilyn again.
Great story. I don't remember that one. I read it. I thought I read them all. That's a wonderful story. Marguerite had a good a good eye for drama and
Yeah,
excitement.
and she was a very kind of effervescent person. So the stories are in keeping with her personality, her vibe.
I'd like to, in a minute, ask you to read another one, but I want to ask you to describe the process of interviewing, the physical process of approaching people, asking them if you can record, asking them if you can use their material, and then certainly you had more material than you could use. So how did that filtering process go forward?
This is a convoluted introduction. I volunteered to help out with the Lynn Museum as they collected materials from black residents for their current exhibit about black people in Lynn. And I did it with my hidden agenda, which I bet you I'm going to meet some people here that I can use, that I can interview. So it turns out I met Fred Hogan, who was the current city councilman from the Brickyard area and who helped found the Hogan's Classic Summer Basketball Tournament. Then I met Dolores Jackson, whose mother helped gain recognition for Jan Matzeliger, the inventor, the black inventor of the shoe lasting machine, which is a pivotal point in Lynn history. So, I introduce myself, I tell them, I ask them, can I come by for an interview, and then I show up. I'm old school.
Were most people amenable to that or open to that?
Yeah. The only guy who didn't want to be interviewed ever was Chick Jacoya, who was the unofficial historian of the Brickyard, who his reminiscences were published in the Lynn Item in 1979. A great history, but he, some people said, viewed me as a competitor. But he does a whole totally different thing. So I've got a tape recorder, a real tape recorder. I put a microphone in your hand so that the sound is as best that it could be with these old school conditions.
Yeah.
Then I record it. Then I listen. I kind of index what people talk about. I go back and I transcribe the parts that I'm most interested in, and then I figure out, what makes the best stories, and then I begin to kind of craft them. So I might move things around. If somebody makes, for instance, Marguerite said that the cigarette was drooling from, you got to keep that in there, and that's what she really said. So, those are the things that I try to go by.
How long was it from the first day you thought of doing a follow-up to your original book and the day you had that copy in your hand?
I would say I probably got I probably decided to actually tackle the unfinished Brickyard business after my father died.
2018.
2018. So 3 years, and then it was a good project for COVID because, as I like to say, it gave me something to do and something to avoid doing. So,
well, there's good benefits to COVID.
Yeah, there are benefits.
We're getting close to time here, but I wonder if you could pick another memoir, another recollection by one of your
well, here's one of my favorites.
Targets in the book.
Yeah. This one is called Rats.
Rats?
Rats. And maybe you knew this guy, Gordon Larrow. He was a janitor, a custodian at the Sawyer Road building at North Shore Community College. And I interviewed him, I think, in 1986. Was it? Yeah.
Well, I don't recognize the name. I'm sure I was there.
Yeah. No.
I'm sure I would recognize
So this is his Rats. Then you had Rats. Ooh, I mean rats. These were rats. I never seen rats that big anywhere, with the tail a good 2 feet long, or maybe better. If they stretched out, they were bigger than cats. You couldn't use a cat for those rats. You had a grain house right across the railroad tracks on Alley Street, and they used to go over there and fill up. There was a combination of wharf rats that came in from, well, the water wasn't that far away. They came into the land looking for food. They hit the grain house and they happened to stay around there. So I guess they went on patrols every night and they hit all the houses in the neighborhood. It was always, everybody had rats in that neighborhood. Everybody I talked to that lived in that neighborhood, even Alley Street, told me about these rats that we used to have around there. They were there all right. I'm talking about inside, not outside, inside. My mother killed 2 or 3 of them when I was a kid. That was when I lived at 46, because we were closer to the railroad tracks. And she killed, I woke up one morning and she'd killed one. His tail was that fat, easily an inch around. He was a big one. And she hit him with a poker. She got up every morning, like about 5, to stir the ashes in the fire and get the heat going. So she had a poker in her hand, and she heard a noise, all this rumbling and stuff, and I came out, and she had just killed a rat. Like I said, it was just like that. So I carried it out and threw it outside in the barrel. It wasn't like people were getting bitten, but they were in the houses.
That's scary and kind of darkly humorous, but pretty dark. You see a rat, you see a big fat rat up close. They're impressive.
Yeah. But I just like, I mean rats. These were rats. So I fall in love with the voices, and the way that people express themselves, and I try to put that at the forefront of these stories. So it's a combination of oral history. I want to stick in that, the major point that I make about the brickyard in this book is that it's been transformed, and now, the neighborhood is kind of shrunken in area to that area below the railroad tracks and above the Linway, but it's broadened in the sense that it's become a brand. So you have Brickyard, the Brickyard Collaborative, Brickyard F, special visual effects, recording people using the Brickyard as a name. So it lives on in that way.
I want to ask in our closing seconds here if Becky Coyle, our wonderful director, could put up the cover of the book again, Brickyard 2.0, and I'm going to urge, while that cover is up there, everybody to contact Amazon and get a copy. Or if they can't afford a copy, go to the Lynn Library or the North Shore Library,
Salem State
Library, and get a copy.
Yeah.
Or they could track you down and buy a copy.
They can track me down.
Track you down. Thank you for being with us, Carl.
Hey, John, thank you so much for having me, getting the opportunity to talk about the book, and I loved reading these stories. These stories are great to read.
It's a wonderful book. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
I want to thank everybody in video TV land for being with us as well. If you've learned something about the Brickyard in Lynn and Carl Carlsen's work in putting together those memories that will keep the Brickyard immortal forever, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thank you very much for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.